Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And something that I started last year that I'm going to continue to do throughout this year is doing trivia reviews for the entire Disney animated collection. And today's movie is the 1951 film Alice in Wonderland. Here is your trivia question for today. Who is the only character in the film not from the books? The answer will be at the end of this episode. In the film Alice in Wonderland, we of course meet our main character of Alice. She is a young, sweet girl who, while hanging out with her sister, sees a white rabbit wearing clothes that apparently is late for some sort of an event. She follows him down his rabbit hole and ends up in a very strange and odd place known as Wonderland. While there, she sees so many wondrous and yet completely absurd sights. And all of the individuals that she runs into are either being very helpful or not helpful at all, but it's very hard to tell. Eventually, she runs into the Queen of Hearts, who you don't want to get on her bad side, as she has a penchant for beheading. So, will Alice only stumble her way into trouble, or will she eventually find her way home? This film is technically a combination of both of Lewis Carroll's books, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Walt Disney originally toyed with the idea of doing the film in animation but having Alice in live action. Catherine Beaumont was the voice of Alice and also her live action reference. Did you happen to know, though, that Beaumont would also go on to do the voice of Wendy Darling in Peter Pan? The original voice of Alice was going to be Ginger Rogers, but Walt Disney insisted on a child actress. Some of the other potential voice actresses for Alice were Lisa Davis, Luana Patton, Margaret O'Brien, and Janet Waldo. Now, Waldo would actually go on to voice the character of Alice in Hanna-Barbera's Alice in Wonderland or What's a Nice Kid Like You Doing in a Place Like This. To help the animators out for the scene where Alice becomes a giant inside the house, they actually built a model for Beaumont to wear with transparent walls so the animators could see how she really looked in that situation. Did you happen to know that the visual version of Alice from this film inspired many interpretations going forward? Ed Wynn did the voice of the Mad Hatter, and the character was specifically drawn to resemble him. In the scene where the Mad Hatter is quote unquote fixing the White Rabbit's watch, Ed Wynn ad libbed all of those lines. Walt Disney liked it so much that they kept the sequence in and then animated it. Dink Trout was the voice of the King of Hearts for this film. This was unfortunately his final movie, and he did pass away before the film released. This movie took 5 years to complete, but was in development for over 10. Also, you may not believe this, but the movie was actually a box office flop. In the 60s, it became a cult hit, and then it was one of Disney's most rented titles in the 70s. It's also the only Disney animated film that had to wait 20 years for its first theatrical re-release. There were over 30 songs created for this film. Second Star to the Right and Never Smile at a Crocodile were originally made for this film, but would end up being cut and reworked for Peter Pan. There are more songs and characters in this movie than any other Disney animated film. There were also multiple other characters that they originally created concept artwork for but never actually made it into the film. These included the Jabberwocky, the Jub Jub Bird, the Bandersnatch, the Griffin, the Mock Turtle, the Knave of Hearts, and the White Knight, who, by the way, was going to be a source of advice for Alice, but Walt wanted her to figure things out for herself. In an early version of the script, Alice and Dinah her cat would end up in Wonderland together. Then Dinah would become the Cheshire Cat, and the two of them, along with the Mad Hatter and the March Hare, would travel Wonderland together, kind of like how Dorothy does with the other characters in The Wizard of Oz. Here's something you may have been confused by in the Walrus and the Carpenter segment. When the mother oyster looks at her calendar and the R in March becomes very prominent, there is a reason for this. There is an old adage that you should only eat oysters in a month with an R in it, since the summer months in England, May, June, July, and August, have heat that would normally cause oysters not to be able to keep, since this was back in the days before refrigeration. The author of the books, Lewis Carroll, did in fact create the riddle, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" He did create it though with no answer. This hasn't stopped people though from trying to figure out an answer. One such suggestion that probably is the closest to a good answer is because Edgar Allan Poe wrote on both. Carroll, by the way, did not actually create the characters of Tweedledee, Tweedledum, and the Cheshire Cat. These were actually from other stories and nursery rhymes. Multiple characters from this film have appeared on the television series The House of Mouse, but the Mad Hatter was actually a semi regular on the television series Bonkers. There was actual talks of a potential sequel to this film, but that never got made. Disney would, however, go on to make a pseudo live action version and sequel of Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. With some of my Disney animated trivia reviews, I tried to give a Dark Side of Disney segment. I, however, did not find anything related to this film that would be considered the dark side of Disney. If you're aware of anything, feel free to mention it in the comments. So, when it comes to the film Alice in Wonderland, I love this movie. This was definitely one of my favorites when I was a child, and most of that is due to the visuals. I just thought this one looked so cool. But in a somewhat objective way, I do have to say it does not have the greatest plot. It is very entertaining, but not very plot heavy. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5. Now it's time to answer the trivia question from the beginning of this episode. Who is the only character in the film not from the books? Now, mind you, almost all of the characters are from one of the two books. Some of them are kind of a blending of certain characters, but they're still written in those stories. The only one that wasn't was the doorknob. This is a character that appears right near the beginning of the film, and even though it's a small role, a lot of people remember that scene. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews. Please keep an eye out as throughout this year and more than likely into next year, I'm going to try to go through all of the Disney animated films.